Oh. That's a lot. Presentation. DM for it said, I expected. Oh, you don't have it?
The backhanded compliment. That's great.
I'm really hoping so.
Oops.
No.
Okay. Stop that. Yep.
Pardon my reading.
Oh, Tim, yes. I should have a little. No. Online.
Everybody needs to watch. We are recording this. We are live on the internet, on Twitch, Mixer, and YouTube, as well as we also record these and post it to our YouTube channel after the meeting. So know that you are being recorded and it'll be posted to the internet. So, other than that, thank you everybody for joining. We are here for the July meeting of the Philly Azure group. I've got some actual announcements because I did actual homework. I'm prepared to tell you a few Azure things to start. Then we have a session on Azure Functions and CosmosDB by Bill Wolf from the Philly.net group and Microsoft MVP. And then we have Rufus Harvey here to talk about cloud orchestration for the enterprise. And then a lot of other stuff. I hope you read it on the meetup side, and I'll tell you what this session is all about because it's a lot. So we have that. But first, a few quick announcements. I'm going to talk about a couple news items, some events. Our next monthly meeting is scheduled for August 22nd. We'll be upstairs in MPR 1 and 2. It is a joint meeting with Bill and the Philly.net group. We have a couple good sessions on bots and bot framework. We have Rich talking about bots, and we have Andy Swarm, local MVP as well. So we talk about bots and Lewis integration, among other things. So it's bot focused, it's Azure focused, it's Lewis focused, and a bunch of other good stuff. So if you're into any of those things, please come on out and check it out. Quick question. If you are hiring, if you're at a company that is hiring, raise your hand. Like 1, 2, we got 2. If you are looking casually and you're not on camera, raise your hand or give them a side eye, do something, meet up with them after.
Isn't there like a special signal or something?
I think that was Steel
Yeah.
Third. So, meet up in the intermission or afterwards and see if that can work out. We do want to thank our sponsor tonight, Bill. Again, he is speaking.
Hey,
and
that's right.
sponsoring.
It's me.
He's absolutely fantastic, and we appreciate him doing both for us. News. A couple of news items I do want to point out. Again, I actually did my homework. I'm ready to talk about it. The first, go to this blog post on TechNet, and it is basically a link. The title gives it away, which is 2 Azure Active Directory white papers. And the first is a short one. It's basically an overview of get up and running quickly with Azure Active Directory. I mean, it's a really short one, but it gives you the basics of what you would need to know if you're not familiar with it. Not everybody comes to Azure with the background from Active Directory. Some people come from infrastructure, some people come from Exchange. You come from wherever you come from. If you need to know a few things to understand it quickly, that's a good one. The second one is a much longer, in-depth white paper on hybrid identity. So a lot of people who go to, yes,
Do either of them cover B2C?
I didn't get to the end of them. They definitely cover,
Gotcha.
I think they cover B2B. I don't know if they cover B2C.
They probably will. B2C is its own beast.
You have to set up your own thing.
Right.
It's a separate AD, even though you have AD.
Cool.
Anyways, we'll get into that. So the second one is really good as well, and because hybrid, a lot of times when you go to Azure, you still have your identity on-prem, or you have users down there, and you have your Azure AD. It's really complicated, and I'm glad there are smarter people than me who do that and help out. But anyways, those links are really good. That came out last month, and I wanted to highlight it. And then the same thing I say every month, which is if you're not reading Azure.source on a weekly basis, you should be. You're here at an Azure group. I'm going to assume you do Azure work, or you're at least exposed to it. And this is a really nice compilation. Basically, it comes out on Mondays. Rob Karen from Microsoft writes it, puts it out, culminates a bunch of important links from the week. Because if you go to the Azure blog and you say, show me all of the new stuff, it's going to be a ton of information. So he writes this nice little wrap up and talks about it. And this week, there were actually 3 really important things. There's more important stuff. These are the 3 that I liked, that I thought were important, that came out. These are all in now public preview. The first is Azure Event Hubs and Service Bus. The VNet endpoints are in public preview, right? So you kind of read what I'm saying here, because the next one is the same thing. It has to do with Event Hubs and Service Bus, and that has to do with IP filter rules are now in public preview. So 2 really important things when you are trying to deal with where your traffic goes, how you want to interact with Service Bus or Event Hubs, and how you want, if you want to have filter rules, you want to have direct endpoints to secure your stuff to and from, etc., etc. You can read it and go into it more. There are links. If you go to the Azure.source volume 39 link, they have links to these articles. These are just the blurbs that came with it. But I thought these were really important. I wanted to point them out because stuff like that is coming out more and more. And then the next one I put in, because I don't know if you're going to talk about this tonight, but Azure CosmosDB Explorer is now out. And it's basically a standalone version of what you get in the portal. So now you get full screen mode. You don't have to be on the blade while you're using the Explorer view. And that is also out in public preview. So I thought it would be important, especially since Bill is going to talk about CosmosDB tonight.
I love that. Standalone web-based.
Right. It means full screen. Minus the blade. You can just use that without being from the blade and make it a full screen. So that's basically it. And a lot of people have asked for that kind of stuff. So
But it still doesn't do joins. Wait, what? You know,
that's in
sold separately.
I don't know. So those are the top news items from my perspective, although please check out Azure.source as well as the Azure blog. Upcoming tech events. I want to point out, okay, I'm still okay. The next one, I talked about the joint meetup. We have that next month. Both topics are on bots in Azure. Here's the link. And I posted it today, so you can sign up here. You can also sign up. Bill's going to post the link for the .NET group, so sign up on either one. But it's the same meeting in the same room, no matter which one you go to. But don't sign up on both. We will figure out those numbers when we have to order food. We also have a meeting tentatively scheduled for September, and the topic is tentatively AKS. That went GA a month ago. I think I talked about it last month. I think it'll go on GA like the day before last month's meeting. That's a really big thing. If you're not up on it, I'm going to try to get a really long and in-depth presentation on that, but I'm still working on it. And also, I was listening to a good blog post, the Microsoft Cloud Show, on the way over, and they have a big talk on their podcast this month about one of the hosts, Chris Johnson. His company moved from Docker Cloud to AKS, and the podcast talks a lot about that experience. So big stuff, and one GA, and we're going to try to have somebody in to talk in depth about it. Tech Bash is in October. That's local. It's up in...
That's not local.
Local-ish. It's in the Poconos. It's regional.
Hour 45 minutes, unless you're in a hurry.
It's in the Northeast. It's
Yeah.
up in the Poconos. And then we are in what?
And that's hosted at the Kalahari Conference Center. So that's really a blast. If you like, if you have
If
family,
you're 11, it's a
along,
blast.
If
If you're an adult, no.
I had a blast.
Like
My family had a blast.
Yes.
So
Good for the kids.
Good.
Shout out to them
Good
for
point.
having it at our water park. And then lastly, our October meeting is, we're working on a joint meetup with the AWS group, and we're going to try to have a overview of AWS and Azure and possibly Google Cloud, and give a bunch of level setting for all three cloud services. But that is, again, that is in the works, and we'll see how that goes. Those are upcoming events we wanted to talk about. Once again, thanks to Bill for being a sponsor. He is the first presenter for tonight, and Rufus is second. And that's what I got. So thank you all. Here we go.
I assume we just plug this in and magically things happen.
Oh,
He has to press the button.
NEDP 2.
Woohoo. All right. So, welcome everybody. My name is Bill Wolf, and I've been doing this computer stuff for almost 40 years. Anybody have that beat in here? I love when I win. Okay. I am going to talk to you a little bit about how I'm using Azure. This is not a... How many of you actually work with Azure and do like enterprise architecture and design Active Directory thingies and... See, 2 or 3 of you. Okay, this talk is for the rest of you. If you want to just try and get in there and play with this and do something sort of useful for a small group of people, this might help you out. So, my claim to fame, other than doing enterprise consulting for most of my professional career, I run user groups. Of course, I run the Philadelphia.NET user group. So this is our meetup, as you can see on the screen. And we have a meeting here tomorrow night, so I'll be upstairs. But we have a hands-on lab on Signal R. We have some other interesting things coming up. In 2 weeks, we have our popular 15 Minutes of Fame sessions where about 10 speakers give little talks on short topics. We're still looking for speakers on that. We're also going to talk about a new Microsoft technology, very interesting, called Blazor. That's at our August meetup. And then, as Tim said, that we're going to share a meeting in August with the Azure group on the 22nd. What is the other thing Philly.net is famous for? Called the Code Camp. All right, so you are the first people to know. I'm actually going to run a fall Code Camp. Woohoo. Do I hear a woohoo? Excellent, okay. The working dates are November 18th, 19th, whatever Friday and Saturday is. Look it up. So it's like the third weekend in November. So I've been working with Rich, and we got approval to do that. We're going to cut the overall size down a little bit so we fit more comfortably into these rooms. But that is our goal, and the call for speakers will be going out in a week or so. Azure boys, you're welcome to play.
17th, 18th.
What is it?
17th, 18th.
She says 17th and 18th of November. So it is official, and word will be going out to the user group tomorrow night, and probably in an email to our mailing list of 5,000 probably sometime this week. So when I do presentations,
Actually, 16th and 17th.
16th and 17th, you're sold. We'll take it. Book it. Okay. So PowerPoint slides are really boring. So we're just going to work from some notes here. And so Bill on Azure. I do enterprise consulting. I work for real large companies. But what's interesting, depending on the kind of work you do, you don't always get to work on Azure projects. And I do what is called enterprise consulting, which means I may not work on the most cutting edge technology. It's my job to keep the stuff running that the company lives on. So I'm in a position right now where the division I'm in, I manage 800 servers, but I don't do the virtual machine side of it. I do things like keep track of whether they're up so we can report to the clients. And the technology I would use for that is App Insights. So there is some use of Azure in my work, but most of our development work is done, basically we run private clouds, so they're not Azure based yet. They're looking into it. So I am a Microsoft MVP. I know there's a couple here in the room. I am proud to say that I get Microsoft Azure credits as part of being an MVP, and believe it or not, I get $1,000 a month, whether I use it or not. So I can do silly things that the rest of you wouldn't even dream of. I could like make databases and forget to delete them and stuff like that. But the whole premise there is that it helps me to learn. Okay, now on to this. I get to tell you the story. Okay, so about 11 years ago, I worked for a company called Unisys. I don't even know if they're still around.
Yeah.
So I was recruited to work on a team at Unisys that was basically selling Microsoft technology services to very large, and when you work with Unisys, you're often working with state governments, the military, really big operations. So as part of that, I actually had to go to Redmond a lot and work closely with Microsoft, and we built some Unisys had these really big servers because they came from the mainframe world. And at the time, we sold the biggest possible server to run Windows on. And when they came out with Hyper-V, that was interesting because we had this huge server and we could run hundreds or thousands of virtual machines on one box, which back 11 years ago, that was unheard of. So the interesting story is that I was on a team, and we went to Redmond and we sat in a room with the Exchange product group. And what the Exchange product group wanted to do is they wanted to test a new version of Exchange that was coming out. So they wanted somebody to spin up thousands of clients and run performance tests and things. And of course, Unisys said, hey, we can make all these virtual machines and line them all up and run all the tests you want. And I was just there as like a technical, fly on the wall to answer questions. But the funny thing is that, we shook hands with them after the meeting and we left, and they said that there was an internal team for Microsoft that they were going to meet with next. And the internal team from Microsoft was sitting in the lobby waiting as we walked out. And they were from Microsoft Research, and they had this thing called Red Dog. And Red Dog became Azure. So we didn't know, the people at Unisys didn't know that Microsoft was working on this technology that could run thousands of virtual machines, but in a sort of distributed fashion on multiple pieces of hardware. And they had written like this, I don't know how they manage all the stuff in Azure, but they could keep track of all the virtual machines and move them around very fast. And of course, since it was all in-house, that was much cheaper than we were going to offer. It's the last time we talked to the Exchange Group. But I got to meet the guys from Microsoft Research that basically invented all this nonsense. So that's enough stories. So there's a sad story another sad story I have to tell you. I had this crazy idea that because of my success with code camps, I could build a conference and I could run that conference in Philadelphia and charge for it. And you should see the people that were going to speak at this conference. And it was supposed to be 2 weeks from this week. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen any of this, but this is the website I built. And basically, it was going to be 2 days of breakouts, 1 day of full day workshops. And as you scroll down here, you could see the price. And then these were some of the speakers. I had people coming from all over the world. This guy is, if you don't know who Magnus Martinson is, he's the guy who started Global Azure Bootcamp. So he's like world famous for Azure. This guy is from Redmond. This guy is from Hungary. But I had all these people scheduled to come, and I had to cancel this because I didn't think the tickets were selling fast enough. Anyways, so I made a pretty fancy website here, and you can go in and you can see all the sessions, you can see the speakers, you can do all sorts of nonsense here. You can go, click on their little links and go to their MVP stuff. But this is something I do as a developer. I build front-end websites that are reasonably useful. And it's sad to have gone through all this trouble to build this, but there's a silver lining, because while I was building this, the intention all along is I'm going to take the source code that I developed for this and use it for UN, CodeCamp. So what you're going to see is there's going to be a new CodeCamp website, it probably in about by the end of this month, that's going to be based on this code base. And that has some important implications financially, and I'll explain as I go through this. All right, I know what you're thinking. What the hell does this have to do with Azure? Control tab. Oh, Azure's behind all this. Ha! Well, it is and it isn't. So that website is actually written in a JavaScript framework called Vue.js. Technically, I'm using Vue.js. Vuex, that's the Redux store. I'm using Vuetify as the material design, and then there's another framework called Nuxt. And all of that is run using ECMAScript 6. If you're not a front-end developer, you have no interest in what I just said. Okay, now the bottom line is when you make a website like that, that is what's called a single-page application. The whole thing sort of is a single page. And it changes routes as it changes views. So every time I go to a route, I might need some data. The data typically is made with calls. And I will show you a little bit of the source code. This is the only JavaScript you're going to have to look at today. So don't get too nervous. Okay. So, can you follow this? Async. What does async mean? You're hilarious. Async, from a programmer perspective, means make this call, have it run in the background, tell me when it's done, so it doesn't delay the screen. It says go get the speakers, and then the speakers. Now this is framework stuff, but it does an HTTP GET. And here's what it does. It says, HTTPS, Philly Tech 365, Azure Websites, API Speakers. Okay, now if any of you want to play, you're welcome to do this. You can just open up a new tab, and you could, for instance, put that, I don't know if I can put it here. That would be sort of a silly thing to do, but I'll try it. Why not? Shouldn't hurt a thing. I'll do it this way. All right. I don't know why it says an error has occurred, but we'll test, and I'll show you how this actually looks inside of Azure. Okay, so back to Azure. Now, there's a couple things I wanted to do. I wanted to, on the website, I wanted to be able to keep track of when people were logging in. I wanted to know what pages they went to. I had to supply the data for the website. Then I wanted the website to do certain things, like I wanted to be able to capture if somebody logged on for promotional code so I could give them a discount. Or I wanted to eventually, when they had the conference, allow people to evaluate a speaker or vote for things. So all of that is built into here, and I'm going to show you how I built some of that. Now, when you're doing this stuff in Azure, you don't necessarily have to run the website in Azure, and I am not, because I already had a contract with another hosting company. Technically, I use oneonone.com, and I already had a place to host the site. And from a cost perspective, it's cheaper to go to an ISP if you want to have a custom domain name. That's one thing that Azure sort of gets you extra money that isn't necessary. So I host the site at oneonone.com, but then the calls are made to Azure for the backend stuff. Okay, now when you make stuff in Azure, I have a number of resource groups. And hopefully all of you know how important these critters are, but basically you want to take all the stuff that belongs to one client, one project, and put it in one resource group. You can use that as sort of a billing context. You can use it as a security context. The real nice thing about it, if you're doing prototyping, if you build something in a resource group, it's really easy to delete the resource group, and everything that you built underneath it automatically goes away, and so do the charges. So highly recommended you use resource groups. So you see I have a couple here that I play with, but I made one for this conference called Philly Tech 365. Okay, so what is in that resource group? Well, there's a bunch of things. And some of these things I was thinking of using, I never actually made. So I made a Redis cache. And I thought maybe I would want to cache some of the data this way. We don't have time today to explain to you, what the value of a Redis cache is. But eventually I decided it wasn't worth the trouble, so I just sort of left it there. Not doing anything. Okay, now, if you're using the portal, the Azure portal, if you look at the breadcrumbs at the top, all I have to do is click the resource group and I go back to the resource group, which is nice. Okay, in addition to that, I made a content delivery network profile. I was thinking of taking some of the files, like the CSS and stuff like that, putting it in a CDN so I didn't have to take the brunt of that cost each time for somebody to download from if I was going to have a lot of traffic. I never used that either. So there's a bunch of stuff I didn't use. There's as part of the CDN, you had to make something called an endpoint. We're not going to go into that too much today. A lot of the stuff you make in Azure requires storage, and that to me, I am not an Azure MVP. I'm not an expert on this stuff. I do know that I need to store stuff up there, And I do know that when I make Azure Functions, it actually makes files, and it has to put them somewhere. So I assume this is where they go. So if I click on this, you can actually see that you could drill down in this, and I don't know, you can actually see that you have files here, and there's one called evaluate, and there's the function. And so if you need to work directly with the files, you can do that. Although most of the stuff that I do as a developer, I just do through the portal or through the PowerShell scripts or APIs. All right, so the thing that's interesting to show you is the functions. Now, how many of you have made Azure Functions and actually used them to do something more than, that's what I thought. Okay, 2 of you. You're the 2 troublemakers. Excellent. All right, well, a function is what they call serverless coding. Technically, it runs on a server. They just like to say the word serverless because it has a marketing smell to it. Okay, so serverless means we don't know what server it runs on, nor do we care. Okay, so you just write some code, you put it in the cloud, technically it gets stored in a file, and it gets run whenever you need it. And they give it an endpoint. When you call the endpoint, the darn software, the source code loads, it runs, and then it goes back down. Well, technically it doesn't go back down, it just disappears until the next time it's needed. And if you're running this a lot, it basically is almost going to stay in memory because it goes so fast. Okay, so for me to run functions, I need to have a place to have the functions. And the functions have to go into an app service, which is sort of like a website. Okay, well, you can't have an app service unless you first have an app service plan. So when you build this, and I'm not going to show you how you build it, but basically behind the scenes, I get an app service plan, and you'll see up here that I'm a small fry. I am using consumption 0 small. That's really sad. I don't want to spend any money on this at all, but I knew that I was only going to have, at best a couple hundred users, and they're not going to be doing it all day long. So just so you know, service plans come in all different shapes and sizes, and they'll be happy to take your money if you choose the wrong one. So anyways, inside the app service plan, you can have an app service. Now, I called almost everything Philly Tech 365 because that's an easy way to remember it. Okay, inside here, you will see that it gets more interesting. Inside the app service, you see that it is running. It has an URL. It has a service plan. Okay, it's assigned to a subscription. And then if I go to the bottom, you'll see that the application itself has settings. Let's go look at that. And there's a ton of these. I can decide if I want to be 32, 64, and I did this a couple months ago. I'm not using the absolute latest, fastest thing. I didn't really care. I just wanted something that worked. But you can see here that there's a bunch of stuff going on. And they have these things called slots. I don't use them. There's connection strings. There's all sorts of nonsense. But it's the kind of stuff that you would have if you were going to perhaps run a website in here. Okay, now, if I could figure out how to get back to where I was, the overview page. There's also settings for the functions. Now, the functions, I can decide what software I want to run and what version. And then there's a whole bunch of keys. We'll get into those a little bit later. But if you click on these, you can actually see that there is some special key that might be used when I make the call to the function. And so on and so forth. Now, the last thing in overview is very important. Does anyone actually know what CORS stands for? Yes, cross-origin resource sharing. They could have simplified that. Basically, what this thing says is if Bill runs a website at oneonone.com and it has a domain name. If that website tries to call Azure, it will be denied unless I specifically allow it. Now, what this means, I can make functions that are used by my website, but nobody else in the world can connect to it because I am blocking it. That way you don't get like sort of denial of service and people attacking you. If anybody tries to go to these URLs, they're not going to have any luck because the only people that can possibly connect to this set of functions are these 5 addresses here. So why would I have localhost 3000? When I'm developing on my laptop, that's the address I use. And, you know, I could have a separate database on my laptop, but the way I develop is I actually take and develop and point right to the Azure functions, right from my development code. And then I'm allowing that, and then I'm also allowing phillytech365.com, which is where I run their website.
So could
Yeah.
anybody use localhost 3000 and get to your functions?
Technically, they could, and we're going to put this in the recording, and I'll probably remove that. So, but you bring up an interesting point. But I am happy that you're paying attention. So, see, this is how you learn. You get it. All right. So, what do I got over here? I got a bunch of functions. Well, the darn website. Let's go over here. Where was the darn website? You should see how many speakers I recruited. If you click on, you're welcome to do this. It's all running right now live. If you click on speakers, I had, I think it was 50 some speakers. And these people are from all over the world. It was a very interesting group of speakers. This is actually the best lineup. I've been doing these code camps and things in Philadelphia for 15 years. Best lineup I ever had. But what's that? Well, you had to go on a family vacation. I mean, you have to, it's priorities.
I liked your description
What?
of yourself there.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, you're welcome to play with this. Okay, now, so it's cute that I can do stuff like I can filter and all, but that's all front-end nonsense that I'm doing. Where does all the data come from? And the data comes from that source code I showed you earlier that says get speaker. Okay, well, get speaker is actually a function that I wrote called speakers. Okay, now when I go to the function, what you're going to see, I'm actually cheating. If you want to make an API for development testing, this is a great way to do it. Because all you have to do is make an Azure function, paste your data in there, and you automatically have an endpoint that supports cores, that has App Insights tracking and all this other nonsense. And it delivers your JSON package really fast. No, it's just a function. Now, this is where we get into an interesting discussion. If you go to Microsoft, they'll tell you that real men use C#. And when they do demos of Azure functions, they almost always do them in C#. And technically, for certain types of functions, C# runs faster. But you know what's really easy to code in? JavaScript. And this is sitting here because it makes all of the Linux and the Node.js people happy, because they can write their functions in a language that they use every day. So I wrote everything in JavaScript. It's easy to do. In fact, there's I wouldn't say considerably, but there's a less coding if you do it this way. So all I have to do is I can log. Now, keep in mind here that I'm logging. Pay attention to that. You got the log. You're gonna watch for the log. Okay, it says speakers request. Okay, and then I take this thing and I say take the result. The context is given to you in the function. So every time somebody calls this function, you get a context. The context will have in it the request, and the request will have things in like the parameters and anything that was sent to you, and then the context.res is what you're sending back. So all you do is assign that, and all I did is I made a JavaScript object that had in it a thing called body, and body has an array in it, and the array has all the speakers in it.
So you're not really fetching the data. You're just like, this is a static representation, right?
Well, yes.
That's like
Technically, I'm using Azure file storage as a database. So I'm fetching the data from the Azure cloud, but not from a database.
Right, so
I could have written this to connect to CosmosDB, which would be interesting if I knew the list of speakers was going to change a lot. But when you build the conference, once you lock in the agenda, it doesn't change much.
right, but in the code which you were showing something like async fetch. It gave that appearance that you probably expect maybe
okay.
delay and all that. But over here, it's like boom.
Okay, yes, but keep something in mind. When you, what did I do there? I clicked the wrong thing. Silly boy. There we are. Okay. So when you do a website that is reasonably complex like this, you're actually going out and getting a bunch of pieces of data. Async means go out and get all this stuff, but don't display it until I have the data. So if you're a clever front-end programmer, and I know that the most important thing to look at are the speakers, I'm going to go get the speakers first. Then I'll go get the agenda. Then I'll go get the sponsors. Then I'll go get, the news items, and I'm waiting for all those things to come in. And the kind of websites I build, as those things come in, they automatically appear on the page. So the async helps on the front end, has very little to do with the Azure side. Oh my God.
What if there was a scenario where, let's say hypothetically, there were speakers who are like, opting out, or there is the little dynamic aspect to it. So
don't make things complicated. Of course, I could have fixed all that.
So could you have introduced, just for the hell of it, could you have introduced
it costs money every time you hit Cosmos.
Oh, okay.
Do you understand that?
No, I didn't.
It does cost money.
Those collections aren't cheap either.
So what you do, you could store all the speakers in Cosmos. Then you write a Cosmos, you could either write a trigger or a store procedure. And every time you make a particular change in Cosmos, you are going to basically generate this blob that you want to put in the function.
Oh.
So you could do that. So that way you could have the in-house workflow that if I had to update a speaker, it updated this. But then all the users, the hundreds or thousands of users, would be hitting this and not hitting Cosmos, incurring an extra expense.
It's like kind of prefetch.
Yes.
Usually speaking.
Yes, it's a poor man's Redis cache. So there. But that's not why we're here. So let's go play with this. So if I go and test this, see, we can test. So I can view the files. Now remember what I showed earlier. There's two files for this function. There's index.js. That's the one I'm looking at. And there's something called function.js. And you don't really need to understand all this, but just be aware that there is sort of a manifest explaining how the function works. And if you're smart, you can go in and tweak these things rather than use the interface. Now let's click on test. What can I do with test? Well, we don't have to do a post, we could do a get, and let's run it. And we have to go all the way down to the bottom here. And for some odd reason, because I have this sent here, okay. Now, you see on the bottom of the screen, it's a little hard for you to see the way I have this, but do you see the output here? This is actually that huge array of speakers, but, okay, what do you see? Request, which is what I put in the console.log. So I can put messages that appear in here that run in the background separate from the data that I send to the user. That way I can test things, I can track things. Okay, so you get the basic idea. That's how you that's how you would write a function and how you would test it. It doesn't stop there. So you can also integrate the functions. When you integrate, you can do things like you can say, I only want to do a get and not a post. Technically right now, this would answer if you did a get or a post, because I didn't specify. Then you have these things up at the top, and I'll explain those in a few minutes. They're very important, inputs and outputs. Okay, I can manage. When I manage, I can show my keys. Now, I am not requiring a key here. In fact, if I go back to integrate, notice that I am in standard mode. Come on now. I didn't mean to click this. I'm going to talk about webhooks in a few minutes. But my authorization level is anonymous. If it's anonymous, it means I can call it without passing a key. I want anybody to be able to go and get the list of speakers because that's something I'm selling. If I want something important, like somebody's actually registering for the event, then I'm going to require a function key and make it so that only certain people or certain codes can do that. Okay. Now, so manage, I can have these keys if I need it. Now, here's the cute thing, is monitor. Okay, well, we just had a couple people log in, including myself. So I can click these and I can see exactly how long it took for each person to get their information. Come on, Azure, you got to be a little quicker here. We're on the clock. All right, well, I'm going to move ahead. I don't want to wait for it to show.
Well, this brings a question, just popped up. Is there a possibility that we could run, I know it sounds a little counterintuitive, but an on-site version, I'm like, okay, I built this from a very, kind of cloud kind of thing.
Yeah,
now I put it on my local, on-site thing.
Yeah, there's ways to do that. Okay. Yeah, but I'm not doing that. Right. So I don't know why that one's taken so long. That's a little annoying. Hopefully I can get some of the other stuff I just want to show you some certain concepts. So does everybody see the value of a function? Excellent. Okay, well, what if you wanted to do the things in your function that were more interesting? Okay, suppose I wanted to store promotion codes that returned back a discount. And I have all that working. I need to store those promotion codes somewhere. That's where things get interesting. So if I go back to my resource group, Philly Tech 365, you will see that I have an Azure CosmosDB. So I decided to store those in, and I'll go to the Data Explorer, and I'm not going to use the fancy new thing, Tim. We don't have time for that today, but I will show you my data. So I have items. I have a collection called items. And the goal today isn't to explain to you how to design CosmosDB. I'm just going to show you a real-world use for it. Now, in CosmosDB, it's a little bit different from SQL databases. You don't have a strict row and column schema. You can store anything you want in there. They call them documents. So there are tons of documents in my schema, or in my collection. And you will see that some of the documents have an ID. These are actually the promo codes. And those have this structure. They say that this promo code, this promotion gets a 7.5% discount, and all this stuff here, that's all provided by Cosmos. The stuff up here are things that I provided. So here's one for me. That had one for me as my referral. And there were some other things here, okay? Now, you can store other stuff in the same collection. Like this is actually a refund that I gave somebody. And this is actually somebody authenticating. And when they authenticate, I collect their information. Now, how many of you know how to spell webhook? How many have ever used a webhook? Okay, so what is a webhook? Well, they're used very, very much in integration in backend in cloud services. So I have two webhooks. I have one from a service called Auth0. Auth0 allows you to log in, and it captures your login credentials. And when you log into the new Philly.net CoCant website, you're going to be able to use your Google account, your Facebook account, all those things. Very popular thing to do. Well, whenever you log in, I need to know who you are so I can keep track of it in the database. So what happens is Auth0, actually written in JavaScript, sends me the information once I log in, and it sends it to my webhook. So that my, my Azure function is going to accept the information from Web0. Now, suppose you go to buy a ticket. If you go to buy a ticket, I'm going to go and put up a screen and collect your credit card information. That gets processed by a company called Stripe. Stripe, if it's successful, calls a webhook, calls my Azure function, sends me all the details of the money that was just deposited in my account. Where am I going to store those details? In Cosmos. So my point is that you can collect data from lots of different sources and store them all in the same collection. Okay, well, what does that mean? How do I work with that? Well, there's very silly query things you can do. So what I'm going to do, I'll just show you an example query. Oh, where was that? There we go. Okay, so if we come here and we say do a new query, they call it a SQL query. Technically, it's not SQL, it's Cosmos, but it's close enough. Oops, that's not what I wanted to copy. I wanted to, what did I do?
You deleted it.
That was pretty silly to do. It's easy to make those mistakes when you're going fast. There we are. So this you could probably understand. Select amount from C where amount is greater than 0. And all this does is it returns back all my transactions where somebody paid money. And a lot of the stuff I've removed from here, I certainly don't want to show credit card information to people, but that's just an example query. Here's another query. I made these promotion codes. So how many of them did I make? And this is an example. So I say select count. It's a little bit different from the way SQL Server works, but say select value count where c.type equals promote. And when I run that, you will see that I have 837. Okay. If I say select star from C, where c.type equals promote, what should happen? They're not rows, they are JavaScript objects, JSON objects inside an array. And then I could return this directly back to my application if I want. But remember, every time I do this, Microsoft is counting pennies, or parts of pennies. Okay. And it adds up. So, all right. So that's basically what's behind the functions. Now, the reason I wanted to show you that is that you might want to write a function that talks to the database. Okay. Now, suppose somebody logs in with a promotion code. Well, what I need to do is I need to call a function called promote. And the way that works, let me go to integrate, okay? The way that works, I'm only going to allow you to do a post. See the lower right-hand corner? So the back-end or the front-end website has to post, And when it posts, it has to send me something, the promotion code, so I can register the fact that somebody used the code in CosmosDB. That way I can add up how many times the code was used, number one. And number two, I want to return back the discount amount to the front end so it knows to apply a discount. Okay? That's where these things in the upper right-hand corner come in. You got your inputs and you got your outputs. Notice that I have a CosmosDB input. If I click on that, you will see that it's going to take the items collection. It's going to do this query. You see in the lower right-hand corner? It's going to run that query. That's pretty easy on programming stuff. It's going to take the ID and pass it so that it returns back the promotion data, which includes the description of the promotion and the percentage. Okay? It's going to get it from my CosmosDB, yada, yada, yada. Now this thing here, input document, remember I showed you that. Okay, now, what is it going to do on the output? It's going to do an output document. And the output document is going to connect to PhillyTech 365. Now, what does that mean? By output, it means output from the function. Input means input to the function. So the front-end website calls the function. The function then gets an input from Cosmos by making a query and returning back the description and the price. Then it does an output by taking some data, writing it to CosmosDB, thereby storing the fact that somebody used the promotion code. Okay, what does the darn code look like? Well, it says, there's where your comment comes in. Look up promotion code. Yes, I could have spelled that correctly, but they don't provide a spell checker in here. Rich, could you add that to the to-do list? Thank you. Okay, so it does things like it says, I found how many documents? I found, and then it says, take the output document, make it the type of promote, and take the ID. So all I want to do is store the word promote and the ID, and then I know how many times the ID was used. Store that in a database. Now what happens in the input? Well, the input is up at the top here, and what I do there is I grab the documents and it automatically passes the ID and stuff, and I'm good to go. So then what I can do here is I can return back this. And what is context.res? Do you remember from the last time? The result that I'm sending back to the front-end application. So basically, I'm making a thing called body that has the ID, the discount level, and the description. So I can shape the data any way I want. Now, what would this look like if we tested this? Well, it's pretty easy. Suppose we use my code. We're going to post. Remember, the method has to be post. We're going to post with the ID of bij2w, and I'm going to run this, and it wakes up and it says, aha, I found a description of Bill Wolf speaker, and it was a 7.5% discount, and there's the ID. And then down in this little section here, you can actually see where I misspelled the word promotion. So basically, that's the concept of building a function and integrating it with the database. It is so darn easy in Azure to connect these functions to the database. Painless. You don't have to worry about connection strings or anything. It just all happens. A lot of value there. It would be just as easy to connect these functions to an email sender or to some other bot that Rich will talk about next month. And the bot might do stuff like go out and see if I want a prize or something. I don't know. All right. Now, let's go and see if we can monitor that this actually ran. And the monitoring, I click here and I say, This one came up pretty quick. So you can see here, it actually shows me in nauseating detail every time this is called exactly what happened. Now, this is the really cool part. If you run this in Application Insights, it brings up this really fancy analytical query tool. And I don't know if we'll have time to run any of these and show you something really wonderful, but let's see if we get any value out of this. So behind the scenes, Azure is storing a ridiculous amount of metadata about everything that's happening with your functions, your website. And that tool is called App Insights. And you can go and they show you fancy graphs and stuff. It's really nice. I'll show you in a couple minutes. I'll show you one more that I'm using. And then they have this analytics tool where you can actually go and do much more detailed queries. Let's let that run in the background, and I'll go back here and I will finish up the things I wanted to show you. So that's enough on functions. I showed you the database. The last thing I wanted to show you is App Insights itself. Now, functions in App Insights are totally integrated. Whenever you make a function, it automatically registers it for tracking in App Insights. How many use App Insights? If you're a hobbyist, learn how to use that. That's a great way to get started to get some value out of the cloud. Okay, now I'm going to show you.
Even if your application is not hosted in the cloud, you can
Correct.
easily integrate App Insights and get tremendous value.
Good point, Rufus, because what I had to do, I'm not going to show you how I did this, but Azure gave me a key and a little snippet of JavaScript. I had to take that and insert it into my Vue.js website. And when I do that, it automatically captures really useful information, and I will show you. So there's two things I wanted to show you here. One is the browser version. Okay, so as the website's running, App Insights is collecting things like how long do my pages take? Which pages have been called the most? It looks like the home makes sense. The home page is being called a lot, but travel and speakers was called also. Okay, and you can do different date ranges and things like that. Now, if we go and say which pages were more interesting, I can click on this and it goes into a more detailed view of this. And then we're going to try this again. I don't know if it's fast enough, but I'll see if we can actually get into analytics and show you the data that it captures. And you'll be fascinated by this. So these are all the calls that were made to this website within probably the last, we'd have to map the times to, I don't know why England is charged a time. Switzerland is much better with clocks, but time starts in England. And I think once Brexit happens, they may change that, I don't know. Okay, now, let's do something silly, like let's go in here and let's say, you know, I really want to know what city people are calling from. And I can say, well, you know, I really, really, really don't care. I can't see the names of these things. I don't care about the item type. There are a lot of things I don't care about here. Let's get rid of the item type. But you can play with your columns. And you'll see over here that these are the cities that people are connecting in with. There may be people out, you know, that are watching on Mixer or something that are following along. But you can get all sorts of ridiculous information. So when I was promoting this conference, I was able to go in and see how many people were logging in. And when you run a regional event like this, one of the reasons I decided to cancel is that a lot of the traffic that we were starting to promote this over social media and I was using Google Ads and stuff like that. And a lot of the people that were connecting in were from like the other side of the country or overseas. That has no value to me. So if you see that a lot of your traffic is not regional and you're trying to sell regional tickets, you're in trouble. Anyways, someday I'll learn more about marketing. I can actually figure figure out how to sell a conference like this. So all this stuff, and you can see up here, they have this elaborate query language at the top that allows you to go in and get all sorts of ridiculous data about everything that somebody clicks on your front-end website. Well, the same amount of data is also stored, and I don't know if I can even go find it. Yeah, here's the one. This is the also analytics, but this is analytics for my functions. And you can see here the lookup promotion code, found one document, all that nonsense. So it's actually taking that particular function, promote, and telling me how often it was called. And I can see exactly how many were successful. Now, you can write your own darn API. A lot of you are programmers, you know how to do that. There's no way in hell that you're going to write an API, host it on a web server, and have all of this metadata collected for you without spending 6 to 12 months and bringing in additional consultants. That's the value of Azure. You put the darn stuff up there, all of the tracking, all of the statistics that your boss could ever want, all comes along for free. Well, not for free, but close to free. Azure functions are very inexpensive to run. CosmosDB is not. Okay, the last thing I'm going to show you, because I know we want to get to the other speaker. The other thing that I use this for is called availability tracking, and I do use this with my clients. But basically in App Insights, they have this thing called availability, which if I'm in the right place, I could click on it. There it is. And I set up an availability this morning when I was playing with this, just to show you what availability looks like. So see this scatter plot here? This is, I'm actually running a promotion code query from like 12 different places around the world every 5 minutes. So it keeps my website running. And this is a way that you can do load testing, things like that. Now let's click on promo code, and you'll find this very interesting. Okay, well there you go. Now you can say, well, gee, these are the different places I'm calling. So from Eastern United States, how was I doing? And it says, okay, average of 905 milliseconds. I can live with that. Okay. How about from the south of France? Well, that's going to take 2.27 seconds. That makes sense. It's around the world. Okay, what if I'm calling from Japan? Again, how do you do something like this if you're building it in-house? And within seconds, I can put this whole thing together, and I can say to the boss, it's like, well, you know, every call you do to the website from Japan is going to be 2 or 3 seconds, and you're doing 10 calls in the front end. So what happens?
They go away.
Does it all take 30 seconds?
No,
No, because you're running async. How many can you run at a time? It depends on what version of HTTP you're using. Usually 4, but newer versions you can actually go more than that. But you're running 4 concurrent requests. If you have to do 12 of them, you figure you at least have 3 of them. They're each going to take at least 3 seconds, so it's going to be 10 seconds before you get all your data. You got all the statistics, you go down to the boss in the meeting and say, dude, this is the way it works. It's the internet. We can't change it. Until they put tariffs on the internet, we're okay. Okay, now, my last thing I will do here is click on one of these little green buttons. I knew you wanted me to do that. It's really cool if I could actually find one. There's goes. And this is exceptional. So I click on the little green button, and it says, hey, you know that one particular test took 2.92 seconds. Okay, and now watch. I click on this, and it actually shows me for each individual request what the headers were. And see, I sent an E tag and I sent a bunch of stuff. And then down here, it shows me the result, which is like a whole big web page and stuff. I don't need all of that. But you see here that it's actually giving me the list of speakers. Now, it's a wasteful thing to be doing this from 9 different countries every 5 minutes. But I just set this up today just to show you that's something you can do. So even though I was inviting everybody to check the site out tonight, it's actually being hammered by Azure constantly, all day long. And it's recording every single thing it does. Any questions? Yes.
If you want to use the functions, the only database that you can integrate easily is the Cosmos.
Incorrect.
Correct. Okay.
You can do Mongo. You can if you have to use Oracle back in the old day, you can use anything you want.
So
You can write if you have your infrastructure set up correctly, your Azure function can actually talk to your in-house database if you have your VPN and all of your security set up correctly. You can get to anything you want. The question is, do you want to run your own web servers to run your API, or do you want this level of tracking and diagnostics? And I would argue that the diagnostics wins. Anybody else?
So the question is, like, is giving all those very interesting statistics, diagnostic data. Does Microsoft charge for this also? Because I could presumably.
Did you see his bank account? Yes, they charge.
So
Everything in Azure costs money. Get used to it.
So could it be? Is it possible that I want to utilize all of the thing, but minus this?
Yes.
Will my
Yes.
bill
You
go
want to
down?
be smart and selective about what you're storing
So
and
turn
where.
off this, turn off the. I don't want
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And the
Yes. So if you want to
expensive
actually
down.
use this in a company,
Right.
hire somebody like these guys that know how to keep the cost down.
Right.
That pays his salary right away.
The application insights, they give you like a gigabyte free per
Free.
No, like they don't start charging you any and you'll get to that quickly if you have a large volume website that you're putting to it. So what you want to do is write a rate limiting adapter that you use in your application code that does a sampling, and they have lots of examples on how to do that. That way you don't go over your limit. Application Insights is really not that expensive, like
No.
comparatively, if you're looking at like cost versus CosmosDB. So I would say don't cut costs on Application Insights. Look at other areas for cutting cost. Application Insights just like pays for itself.
So what I'm doing, working with my boss, because we're using a lot of the testing, availability, stress testing in Azure, we're looking at sucking all the statistics down into a local SQL 2017 database.
Mhm.
That costs us very little to store it internally. We don't get all the really cool analytic queries online, but we still have all the data. And that way we're not, we don't exceed our 1 gigabyte storage. We keep sucking it, and I could do a separate talk on how to do that. But there are techniques to get all the data out, and that keeps your cost down. All right, I can't take any more questions because I want to pass this on to the next speaker. And are you ready?
Sure.
Up in just a second for those on the
Do I get
stream.
do I wear it? What do I do with this, Rich?
Oh, it's a tie.
I-
It's a bow tie. It's a fancy tie.
It's like something in the Game of Thrones you would put around your neck. And
All right. Hopefully that's up. It's up here.
Yep, you're up.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Rufus Harvey, and I'm a cloud advocate just from the community. I have a passion for promoting the cloud platform offerings, particularly serverless and functions. And thank you, Bill, for that talk. That was great. I've not been alive as long as Bill has been doing this, so I'll just put that out there. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about tonight is cloud orchestration for the enterprise. And
kind of let's take a look at and not too in depth on any particular one platform offering, but let's take a look at how we can, kind of gather up a whole, bunch of different platform offerings and put them together in a cohesive application that allows us to automate some of our enterprise and some of those, tasks that we need to do. So what I'd like to cover, first of all, why do we need to do this in the cloud? We'll talk about the approach that was taken and some findings along the way. We'll do a demo in there and some conclusions. So I'd like to, this first of all, let's just level set. This is a pilot approach that was taken as kind of, what you'll see is a prototype, and not everything has been solved, but hopefully it'll give you some ideas on how to, kind of take some of these products and, put them together into something useful. So why do we really need, to maybe this feels like a reinvention of the wheel. Why do we need to do this? Isn't enterprise scheduling kind of a solved domain? I mean, there's product offerings out there that do that. So, most organizations have somewhere in their organization some sort of automation of tasks that's required as a regular part of the workflow. These often end up as scheduled tasks, in a variety of forms, anything from, SQL jobs to Windows Scheduler, all the way to full-blown enterprise scheduling software application suites. As I alluded to a minute ago, there are commercial products that do that. Scheduling engines have, if you've ever tried to write your own scheduling engine, getting it right, it's certainly a challenge. Calculating the next schedule time, are you doing that ahead of your scheduled task run? Are you doing that after? What if your task overruns the interval that it's configured to run on? You've got time zones of the servers that it's running on, daylight savings, leap years, holidays, etc., etc. It's not something you really want to try to solve and write yourself. Maybe you've attempted it. I know I have. So speaking from experience, it's a bit of a nightmare. So that's a consideration. As I mentioned, there are existing solutions. So why not just take one that's out there? Well, the first maybe counterpoint there is that those solutions are very expensive. They will fully automate your needs for scheduled and triggered-based, event-based tasks. So what I wanted to answer, and what I was looking to do, is how can I do this in the cloud to minimize my operational cost and leverage cloud platform offerings? Some of the commercial applications say that they will run in the cloud, which they do on always running VMs. So that drove me to looking at task automation in the cloud. And I wanted something agnostic to the workload. And that task that I needed to automate, whether that's downloading an FTP file, sending data to a client, scraping a website for the latest files, kicking off my machine learning algorithm on fancy GPU VMs, whatever you're kind of doing run-of-the-mill in your organization. And I don't want to pay for always-on compute when my tasks aren't running. And so perhaps your organization is thinking about cloud. Maybe they're fully operational on the cloud, or maybe they're somewhere in between, and that where more and more of these workloads are running on cloud against cloud resources, and so that this sort of approach starts to make more sense, especially when the deliverables are in the cloud. So what were the elements required? So I analyzed the platform offerings on Azure. I wanted to leverage the pieces that are readily available and solve large aspects of this problem domain. I wanted to minimize the amount of custom code required, and I absolutely did not want to use any VM solutions for hosting or running the framework. So kind of the elements that we looked at, we need a scheduler. We need a way to store and execute tasks. We need an execution pipeline, something to manage that workflow, a messaging infrastructure, notification infrastructure. Something goes wrong with my workflow, I want to be notified, and how do I do that with this entirely in a cloud platform? I need a configuration data storage location. If I'm pulling data from a website or downloading from an FTP, or, doing some other process where I have artifacts that are coming out of that process, I'm going to need a place to store those. If I'm extracting data about those artifacts or from a website, I want a place to store that data. I want detailed logging, and so let me go back to that. I want detailed logging so that I understand, if I have a problem, if I get a notification, I can dig into the logs, like similar to what Bill was showing with application insights for your web application. I want that same level of detail, and I want to be able to drill in and look at kind of the specifics of the execution of this. So here's where we ended up. So for job scheduling, I selected the job scheduler as the engine that drives the wake up and start doing something task. For the job scheduler has been an Azure product offering since it was Windows Azure. It actually runs the behind the scenes is part of the service bus. So it's highly reliable and is a well-baked product, and so it's very robust and very reliable. Key elements that you want from a job scheduler: you don't want to miss your trigger for that scheduled task that you're running. So we start with scheduler, then we move to service bus. This is my messaging transport layer. Job scheduler talks to service bus, and then as my kind of my workflow engine, I'm going to use a logic app, and this is another serverless offering that Microsoft has available that integrates directly with so many different Microsoft and non-Microsoft cloud product offerings, just kind of out of the box. This provides me my flow control, kind of a state management. It really gives me a way to drive this whole thing through with retry logic and error notification and all of those sort of things. And then that leads me to a host of other technologies. We've got Azure SQL for configuration data storage. We've got Event Grid for notification events that can be handled as appropriate by multiple consumers. Blob storage, you'll see the logo there for my artifacts that are coming out of whatever process I'm running. CosmosDB for the storage of extracted data from the process, the artifact. and log analytics for capturing and aggregation of all the logging output. So log analytics integrates very tightly with the Logic app, similar to how Azure Functions integrate very nicely with the application insights. You'll also see I splashed a little Docker in there. I wanted a way to just kind of indicate here that you can run kind of any sort of containerized workload or other Azure automation workload that you can conceive of. So if you do have processes that require VMs, you can still put that into this framework. All right, so that's enough slides for now. I'd like to, I'm going to jump over to, we'll start with, and let me zoom this over to here. And so I'm going to minimize this, switch over here. All right, I'm going to jump into the portal here. Let me see if I can go full screen there, a little bit bigger so you can take a look at that. So what we're looking at here is kind of the start of the whole process running on scheduler, and this will just give you an idea of the approach that was taken, and maybe you can find some use for this here. So I have a scheduler job collection, and I have my sample demo daily job 1 here. And if we come over here to the action settings, you'll see in the action settings, I've got the action I'm taking is dropping this into a service bus queue. I specify the job start and the access key, all of that good stuff. The interesting part is where is this message, where this comes in. So I'm passing in a JSON payload, and this will get picked up by the Logic app, and we'll be able to take action on this payload. You'll see there is a retry policy. I haven't set one, but there's an error action, so you can, if for some reason, it fails to fire or tries to drop a message into your service bus queue and it is unsuccessful in doing that, the error action, you can tie that into a webhook for notification on that. I don't have that currently set up, but that's kind of that's the setup for the scheduler job. So that will drop that message into the service bus queue, and I'm going to move this over here to a little full screen here. Oh, and I hit F12 as well. There we go. So let me back up here. We'll dive into what this is doing as well. If we go here up a level to my resource groups, yes, everything organized by resource groups. This helps you keep track of not only where your items are, but you can look at your billing and kind of your cost, where your spend is going by per resource group. That's also a very handy thing as well. So here in you can see all of the different elements that I was talking about. Here's the scheduler, my cloud orchestration, and if I can scroll down here, it's not cooperating at the moment. There we go. I've got my event grid. Here's my service bus. Let me just show you that real quick. So I've got my queues. Not only because scheduler natively talks to service bus, but also because service bus provides a guaranteed execution of handling of items in your queue. That was another reason that we wanted to use service bus, that we picked that this was selected. So you'll see I have two queues here, a job start and a job error, and I'll talk about how those are used in a minute with the logic app. So I do have a SQL database for configuration. It's not currently integrated with my logic app, but that's where additional configuration would be retrieved from the logic app directly to my SQL Azure SQL instance. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the logic app itself, which is here in its own resource group. So Cloud Orchestrator. And you get a nice designer right here within the portal. So hopefully that will reload. Great. So this was some playing I was doing. So once you pick your default, sort of trigger for your logic app, you are locked into that. So when I started this, I was looking at how do we handle long-running processes, within a function app, and so I decided to take the approach of auto-completing the message in the queue, and then if I hit an error condition, I was going to put it back in the queue, and we'll get to that. And so you can see here in a very visual manner, here's the workflow that I have set up, and I have this broken out into a couple of steps here. These are variable initializations, these parameters here, and I just want to give you an idea. This is sort of also a logic app demo, because much of this focuses on the logic app. Give you an idea of all of the integration points available. You can see that they have listed 290 different integration points that you can use right out of the box with with logic apps. So and writing your own connectors, they have really good documentation on how to do that. If you have a product or integration that you need that they don't have available yet. So here you can call Azure Functions, you can call other logic apps to build additional workflows, Azure Queues. So the list is quite extensive, as far as all of the different integration points that they give you right out of the box. So I'm just going to scroll through to the end, and just to give you a kind of feel for all the different things that are available there. So, and then within each action, you, for example, in Service Bus, you have all of these different pre-built types of actions that you can take. So, if you're, you can add subscriptions, you can take them away. So it's really quite comprehensive what you can integrate with using a logic app. So I'm going to cancel this for now, and just kind of give you an idea of what we're doing here. I start with initializing just kind of a timestamp of when it started. I'm not really using that yet. It'll be implemented as part of, for long running, how long have I been running, and what sort of things do I need to do. If I change this to a peak lock where I'm taking a lease out on the message in service bus, and then I want to complete it later. So the first challenge was to take the content from the scheduler job, and it comes in as a base64 encoded payload from the service bus message. So I had to parse that out, and this will be more interesting when I show you some of the execution, execution history on the function, and some of the input and output that they log and show you there. But basically, I had to decode the content and take out some header data that was part of that to get to just the straight JSON. So then I have this basic parse JSON function here, and you can see there's a schema and an option here to use a sample payload to generate that schema. So all I had to do was paste in that same JSON that you saw over here in the scheduler definition, and it generated this schema here for me. So this was once I got the parsing figured out, or to get to the JSON, the rest of this was pretty straightforward. So I do create a job ID. So I'm using the job ID value that gets passed in, and then I create a job run ID that I take the job ID that gets. Oh, this is you can see this is dynamic content. So they automatically click that again. They automatically give you the content that is available to you from previous steps in the workflow. So you can see I have all of my variables ready that I can use. I have the output from my parse JSON. Based on the schema, it knows that I have these data elements available. And here in my job run ID, I specify you can use expressions with your dynamic content to provide the message ID. That's a unique ID for the message that it's processing, and I use that later for logging. So the first thing that I come in and do, and I'll explain a little bit more about scopes, why I have two scopes here. I can expand this out so you can see it's going to do both of these in parallel. The first thing that happens in this scope on the right here is I'm publishing an event to my event grid, and I'm setting some properties here, and sending it an ID for this particular event. I end up taking, this is the first place I use that variable job run ID, and I just put a GUID on the end of that, so I end up with a unique value for this job and this message that is being pulled out of the queue, and this particular event that I'm publishing. And all of this, you can see I'm connected to my event grid, and you just take care of all of this connecting right in this designer. All right. So in this scope on the left here, this first thing I do is switch on the job type if you remember from the action settings here, I have a job ID, a job type, and then some dictionary of data. And so based on the job type, that's going to tell me what action I need to take. And in this here, I have, when it's a job type of 1, I'm going to create a container group. I'm going to instantiate an Azure container instance. Let me just scroll down here. And there's a whole bunch of information that you can specify there. And then once those containers are up and have succeeded, I'm going to delete that container group. So this achieves our objective of creating resources, using them, and then tearing them down that I spoke to earlier as one of the stated objectives. There are, you can see I'm not doing anything too complicated here. I'm just spinning up an Nginx Docker container. I specify the ports, the platform. If you're using a private registry for your Docker image that you build and have part of your CI pipeline, you can put that information here and pull that down. You can specify additional ports, your restart policy, additional volumes. If you have a file share or a storage account that you want to link to that container, that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But this just gives you an idea of how much they give you out of the box here and the kind of things that you can do with the Logic app.
Are you passing information to those containers for them to process something?
Yes. So I pass in configuration data. So this would be used, for example, I don't have the step here, but I would take the job ID and make a call to my Azure SQL database to say, okay, what am I required to do for this job? For this job, what FTP site am I going to go to, and what path, and where should I output that? What's the storage location that I want to use, and I would pass in that metadata in not the demo version of this. I have, but that's what we're doing, is passing in that data as parameters to the container itself through this container group. That allows you to do that.
Okay,
Does
and
that
then
answer
the
your
container runs some form of work.
Run some form of work. When it's finished, then it completes. Right, you saw I was looking here for a status of succeeded. That just means the container was created. I'm going to look for a status of completed. It's going to run a workload. It's going to shut itself down, and then delete the container group and delete that Azure container instance. Sure.
Does it maintain like a step table? Let's say it's going through a few things and somewhere there was a hiccup, and you want it to pick up from where it dropped the ball. Does it give you that option?
That would be something that is very doable as far as workload and state management within the Logic app. So you test for error condition. You'll see I'm going to do that here. So and then if you hit that error condition, you can say start over at this step.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of close to that.
Similar.
What I'm asking is, I've seen like some scheduler or some semblance of it where they'll maintain, okay, they'll announce upfront, I mean at least in the flow that, okay, I'm going to do this. And even if, it's not one of those conditions which has captured it, okay, this is where it failed. Oh, I know it was here. Now I can manually run this. Let's say it's not possible to run all of them
Sure.
Automatically. You say, oh, I'm going to run this manually. I'm okay. I don't want to rely upon the framework.
Sure.
So it doesn't give that option.
So
To run a subset of a, let's say there were 6 steps,
Yep.
and 3 of them ran fine, and the 4th one had a hiccup, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go through 6 myself. Does it give you that option to like kind of maybe offload it as a script, and then you say, okay, I'm going to run these myself?
Behind the scenes, logic apps are really resource group templates. You can if you create your template as like atomic steps, you could take those scripts.
So it does give that option.
So I think so. I'm not sure if it's quite the way you're picturing it, but yeah, you can do that.
My other question is kind of related. Like, I know these are like multiple screens I have to navigate. Let's say
Sure.
I'm going to the first pass and I'm comfortable. Yeah, I've done this. I've kind of I've done the proof of concept. Now I want to run it as a script. I want to run through hoops, kind of. If I can use that loosely.
Sure.
I want to run it as a script. Boom. I know which variable I'm gonna, let's say, if this condition matches, I'm gonna crank up few Azure instances.
Sure.
I'm gonna change the CPU. Boom, 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 and then. But I don't want to go to the screens. All these screens to navigate. I don't want to navigate to that. So does it give you a CLI option?
To execute
This whole line, the whole orchestration.
Sure.
I say, I want to run this as a CLI. I don't want to go to the let's say after first or second down. I don't want
Sure.
to go to it. Does it give you that option?
So you can trigger a logic app from the CLI if that's if you're looking to do that. You can trigger this using a webhook. You can. There's a lot of different. I chose to use Service Bus, as the trigger. So you could from you could write a command line client that would drop a message in the Service Bus queue if you wanted to trigger this same logic flow. I'm not sure if that's kind of what you're.
So I think this is the console version of orchestration. What I'm looking for is CLI version, the counterpart. Like, okay, somebody is not into GUI. I mean, after first or second, they're like, okay, I've seen the GUI too much. Now I want the plain old CLI version. Does it give you?
Are you referring to what he's going through in terms of that screen?
Yeah, I mean,
that's you're showing the designer,
right?
Once that's in place, what Rufus is saying is there's a variety of ways to kick that off. Is what you're getting to. You don't have to run it from
the
there.
code view?
Yeah.
So yes, we'll get to code view because I'm demoing all of this in the portal.
Right.
This is also available as a tool, and how I created this and deployed it was from Visual Studio. There is a logic app designer and code view from Visual Studio, and I'm going to demo that next, and I will show you the code view behind this that you're pointing out as well. So I think that will kind of help clarify.
But the bottom line is, if you're charging by the hour, do it in code.
Right. Thanks, Bill. Right. So you'll see I get to the end here, and I have a condition that is checking for success on scope and scope 2, all the way down here. I'm checking the result of this scope named scope. It is not failed or aborted on both of them, and so if they both succeeded, then I'm going to publish an event that says job succeeded. If either failed, then I'm going to post an error event. Oh,
you missed your D.
Job failing. So job failed, right? Yes.
The French version.
Right. Like your promotion. That's great. This is just a quick demo version. That the additional switch cases here, if you are, if you want to add, additional cases here, you have this option that the default case, yeah, it says invalid job type, publishes that event. Here's where I send the message back to the queue because I already completed that message. That might not make sense if it's an invalid job type. I just wanted to demonstrate that that's what you would need to do since this starts as an autocomplete. You might want to put it, I think I did that. I have it going to, yes. I was a little bit smart that I sent this to the job error queue. So then, a different workflow could kick off for invalid job types. That could do some other processing with that on top of the published event. So let me jump over to make sure. Let me see if I had anything to talk about here. Yeah, let me demo. We are at the Good Visual Studio demo point. I hate that yellow flag. I'm clearly out of date on my Visual Studio. So what we're looking at here is a Visual Studio solution. This was a project. If you come in and say new project under cloud, you have this Azure resource group, and let's say my new logic app, and framework doesn't matter too much. All right, so I think this is gonna create a new solution. Let's see how. Good. Okay. So and then it gives you the templates that you have installed, and you also have the option of, if you've ever played with resource group projects, of going to the quick start template on GitHub or other locations that you can configure. Very useful, if you say had to stand up a Couchbase cluster behind a VNet and all of the associated artifacts with that. Anyway, I'm digressing. The templates here, you can see, hopefully I have it here. Yes, I'm missing it right in the middle, is you have a template for logic app. So this will create the artifacts that I'm not going to recreate right now. And I did close my solution. So let me reopen that. Good. So it creates this logic app JSON, and I'm going to first show the designer here. And this is a Microsoft provided Visual Studio extension that's available in the gallery that you can install, that gives you the option to open with the Logic App Designer. And it's going to look very similar. Hopefully it retains my credentials that I put in. It's going to connect, if you're doing this for the first time, it's going to pop up with a window to connect you to your subscription. So all of these things are connected to your live subscription. So if you want to, hopefully this works, yep. So, if you pick a service bus option and you want to send a message, temporarily add that. So this will pre-populate with your service bus connections. you can see it's using my existing job start connection. I can change that to connect to a different service bus. So this is authenticated live against your subscription and integrates nicely that way. One other thing I'm going to show you before I go over to the code view is also what you get is an option for deploy. And I'm not going to deploy this right now, but if you have not provided any of the, if you haven't deployed before, it will pop up. Well, I can click this one. This will give me the resource group. It will pre-populate this information. Once I click if I click deploy for the first time, it's going to give me another screen that will allow me to provide the credentials for all of the connections that it implicitly knows about. It also gives you the option to use key vault secrets directly from this deployment resource, and once you do that, then that's fully automated, and you have no passwords or keys, for your storage connections or any of those things stored in your parameters or any plain text. And then once I click deploy, it's going to execute this PowerShell. It pops up and minimizes a PowerShell window and deploys it out to this resource group, with the parameters that are specified here. And that's very seamless, and does track versions automatically of your logic app, so you can revert if you do something horrible. All right, so let's just open this. It's going to tell me that it's already open in the designer. And once this loads, yes, let me minimize that. So you'll see here, and I can go bigger on this one, that this is just a deployment template. So these are the resources that it has here, all of the connection strings. If you've done any work with a resource group, this is going to look very similar. So you have the variables and the parameters, with the app name that get used, all of the parameters here. So that was another aspect of this that was really beneficial to us, was the ability to put this in source control and track changes, over time, go back to, a previous release, put that fully under a integration and release pipeline, kind of thing. So yeah, you could certainly come in here, and what you saw come up was this JSON outline that you're provided with resource group projects. So it gives you, kind of a view here, and you can, it gives you templates. This is very similar to the other template for different things that you could possibly want to add to your resource group template. These are not Logic App specific. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to wrap up here with the final part, of this. So findings and conclusions, just a couple of things. When you get to the stage of hardening and security, one of the biggest things to note when hardening your solution is that any of your secrets that you pull in, I didn't show you that, through the Logic App are going to be logged in the Logic App execution history. So, take appropriate measures there, store things in Key Vault, or, provide other solutions. In conclusion, I hopefully have demonstrated that by utilizing Logic Apps, I didn't show Azure Functions, but easily integrating Azure Functions with your Logic App, you're able to reduce your operational costs by eliminating the need for always-on VMs or data center hosted servers, and by switching to an on-demand model that creates, utilizes, and destroys your resources when the process is complete. That what we liked about this as well is this method gives you a right-sized approach to migrate your automated jobs to this framework in a piece at a time fashion. So when you're ready to move specific areas of your organization, over, you have a specific type of workload, you can add that to your Logic App framework, or have it call a different Logic App, depending on how you want to segment that. And the one thing right before we quit here is under the Logic App. It's fine. Just to give you an idea, you have the history of the apps. I just want to show you that this also loads sort of a designer view. It gives you a Logic App run. This is the specific ID of this run. Here's the content that came in. This is the decoded string. You can see that's the header information that I had. The output, taking that out, parsing the JSON. So you get a lot of this detail, and if it failed, you'll see which step it failed at. It gives you error conditions, and then of course this integrates with log analytics, and you can really take a deeper dive in log analytics with specific information there. So next steps that we considered is a scheduler API, admin UI, move some of that common logic to Azure Functions, put in some retry logic, and add some long-running capability. Logic apps have the ability to add in webhooks, so you can kick off a long-running process, put in a webhook, your Logic app will stop running, and you can have that webhook called up to a year later. Hopefully you don't have a long-running process that's quite a year, but that gives you an idea that during that time you are spending zero compute. So, hopefully this gives you some food for thought on how to. That was me. On how to, considerations for how you might integrate this with your enterprise. That's all I had. Any?
You're good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
I feel like we need the guys from Wayne's World. They're like, and we're clear.
That would be great.
Well, if anybody has, is it Garth that would say that, or I think it's one of the camera guys.
I think it was one of the rodents.
Yeah.
Right.
So someone needs to come and dress up as a roadie next month. Is what I'm saying.
It's clearly.
Maybe for the October session.
I vote Rich can do that.
Yeah, I was between Rich or Bill. I think we're saying we need one of you guys to come in next time as a roadie, and give us the all clear at the end, like a la Wayne's World.
You also need to do the countdown.
Clear.
The sound
5,
check.
4, 3,